Natalie. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most notorious men of the 20th century, Muammar Gaddafi.
In order to understand Gaddafi and his motives, we need to take a look at Libya before his rule and the reasons why he came to power. Before Libya's independence in 1951, the country was controlled by Italy, which had annexed the area from the Ottomans preceding World War I. The region was split into two Italian colonies, both of which were ruled by Italian governments and populated by Italian subjects. The Italians committed a plethora of war crimes when conquering the inhabitants of modern-day Libya, including the use of chemical weapons and use of work camps on the Bedouin population. After Italy's defeat in World War II, however, the Allies gained control of the region and gained independence. Idris al-Mahdi, a Libyan revolutionary, came to power and established a hereditary monarchy with himself as king from 1951 to 1969. During his rule, he established a unitary state that created connections with Western powers and that was fueled by the discovery of oil. Despite the kingdom's initial success, high levels of corruption as well as frustration over Western connections by Arab nationalists arose during Idris's rule, leading to his overthrow by a coup led by Gaddafi.
Muammar al-Gaddafi was an Arab nationalist born to a Bedouin family in the middle of the Second World War. In order to obtain an education, Gaddafi attended a military academy in Benghazi. There, he rose up the ranks in the military and led a coup against the Kingdom of Libya. Gaddafi deeply admired President Nasser of Egypt and incorporated many of Nasser's anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist political ideologies into his own worldview. Gaddafi, like many of his fellow Arab nationalists, believed that the kingdom placed too much emphasis on monetarily satisfactory relations with foreign powers, especially when it came to oil exports, and neglected the financial and social needs of the majority of Libyans. Now, under the rule of Gaddafi came many revolutionary ideas and changes. Gaddafi declared the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya in 1977, whose government ideals were depicted in the Green Book, much like Mao Zedong's Little Red Book. Gaddafi began his rule with a series of reforms that were outlined in the Green Book, which contained the Third Universal Theory. The Third Universal Theory was an outline for which the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya was based on. Now let's go to the thought bubble. The Third Universal Theory was based off three main points that were the focus of his government. The first point highlights the creation of Congress and committees for a hierarchical government and social structure. The second point is in regards to the economy. It states that the solution to all economic problems is socialism. The book and its government were inspired by Islamic socialism and Arab nationalism, which explains Gaddafi's criticism of both Western democracy and Marxism. Finally, the third point focuses on all public aspects which touched on women's rights. Gaddafi stated that there must be a world revolution which puts an end to all materialistic conditions hindering women from performing her natural role in life and driving her to carry out man's duties in order to be equal in rights.
Muammar al-Gaddafi's ideas and government helped him rise to power, but one of the greatest turning points in Gaddafi's consolidation of power was the Cultural Revolution that he declared on April 15, 1973. Prior to that day, Gaddafi had disagreements and tension with the Revolutionary Command Council, the RCC, and this resulted in the RCC demanding Gaddafi to resign in Zawiya on April 15, 1973. Gaddafi agreed to this, but when he was supposed to announce his resignation, he announced the Cultural Revolution instead. Now, let's go to the thought bubble. Again, the Cultural Revolution was targeted on the return to Islamic and Arab values, which was supported by 5 main points. The first point was the annulment of all existing laws and their replacement by the Sharia law. Second, the repression of communism, conservatism, atheists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and capitalism. Third, the distribution of arms to the people. Fourth, administrative reform and a purge of the administration. And fifth, the promotion of Islamic thought and rejection of un-Islamic ideas from other countries and cultures. Therefore, during this time, the General People's Congress and People's Committees were formed to enforce these points and the revolution.
As a result of Gaddafi's rule and policies, the per capita income rose and Libya was developing rapidly. Not only was Libya's economy stable with little foreign loans and little debt, but Libya built the great man-made river under Gaddafi, which brought substantial health security to many African people. Despite some of the positive changes that were a result of Gaddafi's rule, the country and Gaddafi himself were involved in many scandals and faced many issues. Gaddafi demanded that at all times he be followed around by a squad of female bodyguards wearing heels, who he insisted all be virgins. Gaddafi also dressed in odd, costume-like garments and considered himself the king of Africa. He also demanded that he sleep in a huge, lavishly decorated tent instead of a hotel when he traveled abroad.
The dictator was also involved financially in many anti-Western groups, and his regime was heavily involved in some of the most prominent terror plots of the 20th century. In 1986, Libyan terrorists were implicated in the bombing of a Berlin nightclub, in which 86 people, 2 of which were American servicemen, were killed. 2 years later, Libyan terrorists were blamed for the explosion of a passenger plane carrying 259 people over Lockerbie, Scotland. Every passenger died in the bombing, in addition to 11 civilians that were killed as a result of the debris. Gaddafi voluntarily harbored the accomplices involved in the terror attack, which garnered outrage from the international community. No less than 1 year later, Libyan terrorists, including an in-law of Gaddafi's, were involved in the bombing and destruction of a French aircraft carrying 170 people. Again, every passenger was killed in the explosion. As a response to this, the UN imposed heavy sanctions on Libya, and the economy faltered. Gaddafi was ridiculed and despised internationally. In the 90s, however, Libya's relationship with the West began to mend, when Gaddafi helped intelligence agencies of the West crack down on radical Islamists. The fundamentalists opposed Gaddafi's regime, fostering an unlikely partnership between Gaddafi and some Western nations. In 2011, the UN abolished a majority of the sanctions on Libya, opening up again the oil trade to Western nations. Libya's economy grew immensely from the oil profit, but still, most of the money went to Gaddafi's regime rather than the Libyan people. The wealth gap was never more apparent, and due to the rise of the internet, people were able to have access to the atrocities of the Libyan government against its people.
In January 2011, however, the Arab Spring began in Tunisia, inspiring the oppressed Libyan people to oust Gaddafi from power and implement a new government. Despite the repression and Gaddafi's initial success at undermining and killing the protesters, his aggression fueled the resistance, and eventually the rebels formed the National Transnational Council, which was soon recognized as a legitimate government by over 30 countries. As the revolution's power increased and Gaddafi's waned, support for Gaddafi significantly decreased. Eventually, Tripoli, Gaddafi's stronghold, fell, and an arrest warrant for Gaddafi was issued by the International Criminal Court. In late October, Gaddafi died. It is still unclear whether Gaddafi died in a gunfight or a bombing, but either way, he was killed violently. After over 4 decades of oppressive rule, Gaddafi's regime was toppled handily in less than a year. Since his death, the country has been in turmoil. Although Gaddafi's government was corrupt and repressive, they did provide a sense of security. Gaddafi is a complicated character in world history. Although during his rule he was able to protect his country from imperialism and neocolonialism, his means of doing so isolated his people from progress and led to numerous human rights violations. Thank you for watching,
And tune in next week.